Yeah, test. This is the mic test. My name is Glenn Oliver Muse. The statement I'm about to make is true, factual, and I swear on the Bible that I'm holding that what I'm about to say, my story, is my story. It's true. I swear to God. Now, you might be wondering, why am I making this? Well, I'm making this for the Human Rights Commission so they can have a record. There's been too many rumors, too many stories, too much hyperbole, innuendo about me over the past 50 years, and it has gone beyond the pale. So I'm about to tell you my story. It's for the record, and without further ado, let's get started. I was born January 11, 1955, on a blizzard, the 200th anniversary of the Grand Revolution, the expulsion of the Acadians. Currently, I'm 68 years old. In the 60s, during the 60s, the coal mines in Waterford were closing, and there were 8 children in my family. My mother was a nurse, Frances Helena Ling. She married Alec John Muse, and they had 8 kids. I was the oldest boy. And during the 60s, I struggled like a lot of young people did then. There was no work, and I learned how to do menial jobs. I learned from local tradesmen. I could do painting houses, windows, could do carpenter work, build steps and fences. And so at the age of 15 years old, I was a normal teenager, basically, in Sea Cadets, looking forward maybe even to the seminary. I don't know. At that point, all roads were open. All you wanted to do was work, make a few dollars, get some clothes, go to the dance, maybe get a girlfriend. And on July 14th, 1969, that came to an end. I was working for a local merchant, and we were installing a fence, and I got hit in the forehead with a mile hammer. It killed me instantly. And I was taken to the local hospital, brand new hospital in Waterford, 1969. My mother was working emergency, and they wheeled in a carcass that was full of blood, and she revived me, brought me back to life. At the same time, we had Dr. Napoli doing his first appointment in Cape Breton. Neurosurgeon, happened to be in the hospital. Think about that. Now I'm dead. They bring me back. I've got a hole in my forehead where a silver plate covers. That's what you call traumatic brain injury. There was no help for people back in 1969 or 70 for if you had a traumatic brain injury. You would suck it up, buttercup. And I was in turmoil, and nobody knew the extent of the turmoil that I was in. They didn't expect that God would have a hand in saving my life and appointing me an angel that I didn't get to know till later. Now, I'm telling you this because for the past long while, I've been made fun of, been ridiculed, been humiliated because of this traumatic brain injury being misdiagnosed as bipolar. Well, it is not bipolar. A lot of people get traumatic brain injuries, and they're not accounted for. If it's Sidney Crosby, then he gets lots of money to go have a doctor look at it. In 1969 and 70, there was nothing. I had to overcome obstacles that you would not seem, you would quiver. You would shrink away, I'm sure of it, most of you. Okay, so now here I am in a state of confusion with my head wrapped up with a silver plate And most of the time, I'm not understanding what or comprehending what's being said to me. And you can't go about explaining things when you really don't understand what the question is. So I was in a very bad state for a while. I was in a coma. And I had someone who used to play chess next to me and announce the moves. Remarkably, I could play chess when I came to. That was the beginning of how God planned to put me back in shape. Okay? From there on in was a training for me. I couldn't stay in school. I was ridiculed in school. I was just made fun of. It was a horrible thing. The teachers, it was terrible. Okay? And acting out as someone that, like, what I have is akin to sometimes it's like Tourette syndrome. Like when you get hit in the frontal lobe and all of your executive functions are switched around, there had to be an accommodation made to grow another part of my brain to accommodate the functions of a normal individual. Now, they had two things in mind. I could have been an idiot just sitting in a chair drooling, or something else could happen, and God chose the other route for me. Because I started to re-educate myself. I traveled. I took off out of here. I ran away. I remember walking from here. I walked from here to New Brunswick, where I collapsed in a field at the age of 16, trying to get across Canada, trying to get to a family, my Uncle George Muse in Winnipeg, trying to get out because I met them in the summer and that's the kind of family I wanted, and I was going to go there, and that was on my mind. And on my way there, in 1970, in August of 1970, I was at Sudbury, Ontario, and you can look this up, the most freak tornado to ever hit Sudbury touched down less than a kilometer from where I was standing. And at that same time, down in British Guyana, way down in the jungle, the communists were kicking my Uncle Bob, a missionary priest, Father Bob Ling. They were kicking him out of the country and confiscating his compound, who they gave to the Reverend Jim Jones. My Father Bob Ling, my uncle, my godfather, he ended up having to leave the priesthood. He was very ill. But my life was only just beginning because I had traveled and worked and traveled and worked and learned. I didn't get out of high school, but I spent a lot of time drinking and carousing and learning, and come back to Cape Breton many times. Come back and go on Pogie. And then I got a job, as you will, in the coal mines. I started in the coal mines, and I worked at a job. I used to get off the rake in the mine and stand on the spot where the guy I got his job. He died there. He was a friend of mine. He died in the coal mine. I got his job. Alan Tothe. And I worked in the coal mines. I was injured in the coal mine. We had a major strike. And here's where all of the trouble from Glen Muse starts to pile on. The very first strike in the coal fields in 40 years, I was involved in it. And I'll tell you straight up, you can come and arrest me if you want. But I derailed a train that was scab coal by the CBRT and GW. That's when I realized that all unions were crooked. There's no real unions. You could only have a cooperative. And so after the strike was over, we attempted to get rid of the unions and put in our own union, which would be more of a co-op, where we could actually be involved in the planning of the mines. But unbeknownst to us, they had already planned to start closing the mines. And so, regardless if we won the union debate or not, DevCo was planned to be shut down. And I realized that I had got injured, and I took my check number and I made my way to Cape Breton University. I got to Cape Breton University as an adult student, a mature student. I didn't even have grade 9, but I had read more books than most people in the building. Nevertheless, I enrolled as a mature student, and with the help of some great people like Mary Keshen and Campbell, God love her. She'd kill me for forgetting her name. Pat Campbell. Without her and these people helping me to learn the mechanics of writing, I never would have went into university. I enrolled in the first Bachelor of Arts program, 4-year core curriculum, 7 liberal arts. Not like a BA that you would have today. This was the first degree program being offered by Cape Breton University, and I was in it, and I was a major part of it. And all of the professors were my friends, and they were older, and a lot of the students were younger, and because of that, there were older students like me and Angie LeDrew, Ray Holland, there were a crew of us that were older people, and we were able to engage the younger people. And Dr. Charles McDonald often said, without us being there, in particular, that probably would have failed. So I went to Cape Breton University. At the same time I was working, I was selling photocopiers and printers and computers before there were ever in any office in Sydney. In 1988, I went to work for Greg Delaney at Office Products and Consultants. And I sold photocopiers, and I sold printers and ribbons and you name it, sold it on the bus with a briefcase. Rather successful. Now, the whole time that I was doing that, I was trying to develop some type of a plan where I could adapt to being a businessman, because the unions turned out to be phony. And at that time, I was disillusioned also in the business world because we were selling a lot of product, but there was a lot of money that was not being put forward, was going back to these major corporations, and that was the disillusion. So I continued on, and a recession hit. I managed to have I took on the debt of a company that was going under, created another one, which was a high pressure wash business, and we secured contracts with Devco and Maritime Tell and all that, and so that company went on its own, and Superior Wash, and then the other company, Office Products and Consultants, was split up in 4 pieces, and the employees, the 12 people that worked there, all took part in these different companies. There were fax machines, computer service, photocopiers, they're all over the place. It was thriving, but I wasn't. I had a major mental break, I guess you'd call it, because I wasn't treating my post-traumatic stress with a very much concern, and I just wore out. Overabundance of stimulants too. I haven't had a drink in 40 years. So I've been sober 40 years, since 1983. I managed to get involved in some pain pills early on, but they weren't my liking, so I never did get involved in that. But the thing is, all through the time that I was fighting this head injury, I was being mislabeled, and this is when it started. So somebody started talking about bipolar, and that got thrown in the mix because there I am. I'm an eccentric individual to begin with. I had dark humor. I like to stay up late sometimes, and so they pinned me. But never looking at the head injury, always looking at some kind of reason. Well, cognitively, I was doing fine. I just went through university and graduated. I just ran a business for a couple of years. I was just wore out, and I needed a rest. That's all it was. And when I rested, and I came out of that rest, in 1993, I realized that they were going to take Cape Breton and sell it to the Chinese. And that's exactly what they did. And they shut everything down. It then came to me that I was going to get involved. I had a political science degree. I had lots of time on my hands. And I knew they were coming up with a plan called Agenda 21. And I got notice of this, that they were going to regionalize everything. They were going to sell everything off, and they were going to shut down all the small towns. And they did exactly over the last 30 years what I said they were going to do back in 1994. So I put my hat in the ring at the time. I created a character. I created this character with a duster and an outback hat. And I wanted the look of a renegade. And I went forward, and I put my name in the ring, and off we went for mayor. Well, lo and behold, we were all over what was then called talkback radio, and there was no internet, basically, no cell phones. So what you had was this little Hitler guy named Dave Wilson, who actually got his comeuppance later, made fun of me, but he ended up getting arrested and going to jail later on. Anyway, so I was all over the radio, and I had quite a following going on. So what happened was running for mayor, and popularity was growing, and I started to get served property protection orders that claimed that I wasn't allowed on their property, and so that every Tim Hortons, I wasn't allowed in there. I wasn't allowed in the radio station where I was supposed to do an interview. I was banned from there, banned from the mall, banned from out the shopping center, and there was all kinds of people trying to get me out of the race, and I was in. I was already registered legally. All the documents are in, nominations, the whole thing, and it looked like I was going to try to debate these people. I got into debate and did very well in the first debate, and that's when all hell hit the fan. You know what? Well, right after that, there were complaints made, and there were a couple of people who were paid by victims of violence who swore that I harassed them. And so that, of course, that gave them the authority to issue a warrant for my arrest. And when I stepped into RCMP territory, I was arrested and then placed in jail, incognito, away from everybody. That was my first time being placed. And then while in there, during the election, I wasn't even allowed to attend the debate, of course. So what happens? We get, the election is over. I am, of course, branded as a retarded person, mentally ill, and they come at me hand and fist. They never stopped. Okay, it cost them $250,000, and I beat Hayes McNeil from jail. They never forgot that, and it's been dogging me ever since. And it dogged me all the way out. Now, I had to leave, and I went to Halifax, where I created a Nova Scotia Health Alliance, and I tried to understand my head injury, but they kept on bringing up the bipolar thing. You couldn't get away from it. And instead of traumatic brain injury, it was always bipolar this, and chemicals for this, and chemicals for that, and you never got anywhere. So up in Halifax, I tried to organize brain injured people, and that was like herding cats. So I come back to Cape Breton, and at the time, my mother and I were both having problems medically, and I came home because she had a massive heart attack, and it wasn't just shortly after that I had a heart attack, and they had to do bypass surgery for the first time. They took my heart out, and they repaired it, put it back in, clamped me back up. That was in 2000. And before that, I had been buried in the coal mine prior to that in 84, 83. So I was no stranger to death. Been there, done that. So I came back again. This time, my mother is ill, and her kidneys had failed her, and she was too weak to have a transplant, and it didn't look good. She was going to dialysis 3 times a week, and my brother Chuck used to take her, and I didn't have the guts to. It was very difficult to watch. And but anyway, there was a miracle because there were a lot of prayers, and my mother, for some reason, other than God knows, her kidneys started to work enough that she didn't need a transplant. This is the first time it ever happened, and she lived 10 more years disease-free. She got to travel, meet her grandkids, have a little house up behind my brother for 10 more years. And she passed away the 22nd of February, 2012. Now, with me, I ended up in the hospital, burnt out. And a couple of years had gone by, and they tried to pin all kinds of nonsense on me in Waterford because of uncovering people stealing and the corruption that was going on in the downtown development group. And while I was disclosing all of this, they tried to set me up and false claims again, and they threw me in the lockup over here. Tried to blame me for being a terrorist, of all things. And this is where all the lies are coming from, and all this nonsense that's out there in the public, and the stuff that the mayor and council and the local police, all their mythology that they're built up around Glen Muse, when there's no proof of anything. Otherwise, I'd have been put in jail. They just like making up things so they can protect the guys that are hiding the money and the corruption. That's what's going on, and it's come down on top of me. So here we are. Instead of getting angry, I didn't get angry. I turned the other cheek. And I went, when I got medical treatment, and I went with a group of very powerful women from the hospital, and we formed supportive housing for individuals with mental illness, and we called it Shimmy. Okay, the very first Shimmy house is where I'm living. I've been here 17 years. I did fundraising to help build this house, to reclaim it from being a burnt out crack house. And while I did that, I worked tirelessly with mental health without pay. Okay? And I moved a guy in next to me, Burton, who nobody else would take time of day to be around because he stuttered. And because he stuttered, they got him into trouble when he was younger. And they put him in a mental institution because he stuttered. And then they got him in there. And then it was shock treatments. And then the result of that was permanent dissociative mental health issues, schizophrenia, you name it. Anyway, I moved him in next to me as my friend. And he lived next to me without going back to the hospital once in 7.5 years. He died in my arms on the front step. Upstairs was my good friend Mabel Hutchins. And Mabel and I were good buddies. We attended church together. And she felt safe there. And she lived there until her medical conditions had to let her out of here. And Judy Brophy, another very good friend. And she came from the mental health community. And she was a hard cookie. But not for Glenn. And her and I and Burton and Annie, we were friends in this house. Supportive housing. Okay, all of this was going on, and my friend Burton, who used to like to go down to the mall, but they wouldn't let him in. They didn't like the look of him. Everybody else could get in at the Cole when you could go in the mall, but they kept pushing him out. And I went down there one time to find out why the security was doing this. Yeah, and then I, because of being vocal, got accosted by 3 security guards accused of stealing something that I didn't steal. And the next thing you know, I had 3 security punks that were beating up on me and followed me home right to my house. Where they then called the cops and I was the one charged. After what they did to me, they all took off out of here then. They left, they went out west. Nothing was ever done, but I went to court for it. I had to plead guilty because of the shit that they piled up on me, and it wasn't true. And if it were ever tried again, it would be thrown out. So that happened while I was here in this house, and it hasn't stopped. Okay, every time I go to help somebody, I keep getting crapped on. I go down to Pathways to Employment, for instance. Early on, John U. Edwards was in charge of Pathways at the time. I come up with an idea that we build bug-out bags, 72-hour kits, that we would distribute to the poor and the needy in the area. And so we got the grant to do that. And when they found out it was Glenn Muse that actually was doing this work, and we did put out 350 bags, kits, but they fired him. And then they put all their crazy people in charge that are corrupt. And now I was on that corruption case and the robberies that took place at Pathways to Employment, at the Missing Link Cooperative, at Crossroads Clubhouse. All the bank accounts were cleaned out by a guy named Hallie Sullivan. He worked there. And then as a result of that, we had a young man commit suicide. Nothing was ever done. They let him walk away. And if an investigation was ever done, and that's why they kept calling me crazy. The crazy finger, paint them with the crazy glue. I had a 2.5-hour interview with the police that gave them evidence and showed them. But no, nothing was done. Why? Because the people involved are all pissing in the same pot. The same people that are discriminating against me on the bus. The reason they're doing that is because they're trying to one up the other. Oh, that crazy Glenn Muse. That's what they said. Even David Burke with the CBC had to write an apology saying that I was a nutcase because I presented facts. And when I wrote to the council, everything I wrote were facts, things that were happening, questions that I wanted answered. I have a political science degree from Cape Breton University. I have the right to ask these questions. But no. What we had was a mayor who got all upset over being taunted because of a couple of name-calling incidents that were attributed to me that never took place. Again, hyperbole, rumor, innuendo, to the point where she said she was scared to go to her car. Why would that be? I don't hurt anybody. People attack me. I'm the one that has to defend myself. Right on my front step. Some of the young Pride community jumped me on my front step. They destroyed the statue on the lawn in the front of my house. That's there in memory of the Blessed Virgin Mary and in memory of my mother. And this Pride community, with the blessing of the mayor, came up and destroyed all that and attacked me, which gave me an injury, which led me laid up for 5 months. And then I had to have serious surgery in February of this year. And still not allowed on the bus. And we're coming back to that now. I've never harmed anybody intentionally in my life. And when you talk about being a threat to the community on the bus, and you have no proof to back that up, that is a serious violation of my constitutional rights under the Charter. And it's laid out in the complaint along with the Nova Scotia Human Rights Commission against the City Council and against the Bus and Transit Commission, James Forsey, Terrence McDonald. I've never hurt anybody intentionally. The only person that ever got harmed in my life was me. I could tell you a lot more about my background. I've traveled 32 states in the U.S. I've worked at more than 50 different jobs, trades. But no, everybody says I'm crazy. Really? Well, we're going to find out. I hope that you take this and do what you will.